Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. Um, Yesterday, you'll remember that we watched a little Cold War documentary or a section of it. I'm just going to pull this up so I remember where we are. Oh, yes. We read this section of the text because I wanted to explain a little bit about what was going on in the video because the video didn't explain it quite to the degree I was hoping, right? So let me see. Oh, yeah. So we said that Khrushchev he came into power in 1956, I think. Khrushchev comes into power in the Soviet Union, and he has a speech with three themes, right? And those three themes are what?
De-Stalinization.
De-Stalinization, good. Second one, or third one. Don't have to be in order. Say again? Yeah, well, that's kind of de-Stalinization, I think, right? Is kind of do the plan to do things differently than Stalin had done them, right? A different approach, right? Two other things though.
Many roads to socialism.
Many roads to socialism, right? And then
And the recognition of the growing importance of the developing world.
good. So, yeah, so three of them. And these first two are going to be really important for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, right? Because he's presenting maybe a softer face of the Soviet Union than Stalin did. And he's saying, there's lots of different ways that countries can be socialist. They don't have to just listen to Moscow, right? And so that's going to cause problems for him, right? Particularly in Poland, right? So we said in Poland, as soon as Poland hears that the Soviet Union isn't going to be as big and scary as it used to be, they start to push for more independence, right? They start to push for sort of more independence and ability to make their own decisions. And Poland kind of plays it perfectly, right? They manage to kick out members of the Communist Party that are loyal to Moscow. They get to put in a new, what's the word I'm looking for? Party secretary, there we go. New party secretary who is kind of interested in Polish socialism, not Moscow socialism. And so they kind of managed to get a little bit of independence, right? Khrushchev has got the tanks ready to roll in, but he decides, you know what? We can negotiate, we can let Poland away with this. But it's going to be a different situation in Hungary, right? So Hungary is going to see that Poland gets some concessions, right? They manage to get some more independence. And so Hungary starts to push harder, right? There's strikes, there's revolts. They start to talk about free elections and free press, but then they make a fatal error, right? So Imre Nagy, who we saw in the video yesterday, he declares that Hungary is going to withdraw from the Warsaw Pact, right? And Khrushchev says, nope, not happening, right? Why does he not want that to happen? It's just Hungary. Who cares about Hungary? What's that? Right, the others will follow. Khrushchev's afraid, if Hungary leaves Warsaw Pact, then Poland will, and then Romania will, and then before they know it, all of those countries will be aligned with the West, and the Soviet Union will have no protection, right? No buffer. And so, and he's probably right? He's probably right that that's the case. So, again, as soon as Imre Nagy declares that Hungary will leave the Warsaw Pact, Khrushchev says that's it. The tanks roll in, 20,000 people are killed, and they install a brutal Soviet dictator in the place of Imre Nagy, right? So again, the Soviet Union is not going to let these guys go, right? And so this kind of shows us here that, again, nationalism is a strong force in Eastern Europe. So even though all these countries are under Soviet leadership, they still have a strong kind of identity about who they are, right? As Poles or as Hungarians or as Romanians or whatever, right? The other thing is that this Soviet bloc, these Eastern European countries, are all held together by the threat of, the threat of the Red Army, right? They're not held together because we're all being communist together, right? It's not some sort of communist brotherhood that holds that together. It's military force, right? The Soviet Union will crush you if you try to, escape, right? Good morning. The Soviet Union might be forced to allow some measure of so we also see here that the Soviet Union is prepared to negotiate, right? Clearly Hungary took it too far and asked for too much, but Poland was able to negotiate and get, to get some extra wiggle room, right? And finally, the idea that military force is going to be needed to preserve this Eastern European bloc, right? Okay, so I have a couple more pages for you to read because I need to set up the video that I'm going to show you next, right? So a couple pages that deals with the lead up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is going to be the sort of most dangerous thing to happen in terms of the Cold War to this point, okay? But we need to set it up a little bit. The sections in Microsoft Teams, I'll let you read. We'll talk shortly, okay?
Yeah.
195 is missing?
Yeah.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me. It may be, is it because there was a,
I think you put it together with the readings from yesterday,
okay.
but you missed out the second part, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Okay, let me just have a look here. See what I did. That would be bad. That would be bad. Hang on. Hang on. Oh, it's 196. Oh, I see. Okay.
Oh, wait, no. There's another one.
Is it?
194, 194.
That's what we're looking for, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
My
And then, no, it's okay. It's a little confusing because
bad. So,
yeah, because I skipped over 196 because the questions for this section are all on Yeah, they're all on 197. So you're right, it is missing, but I think it's okay. That's not that. Okay, so that's probably enough time, I think. It's not a long section. So just to just to set us up before we get into this, remember that in the video yesterday, we had President Eisenhower and we had General Secretary Nikita Khrushchev, and Khrushchev had just shot down a U-2 spy plane, right, from the US. And so it looked like the two sides were kind of getting, chummy, right? We're kind of making friends. Khrushchev had come and made an official visit to the US or to the USA. They were all friends and happy. And then the U-2 spy plane gets shot down, right? So the Americans are kind of, from those spy flights, they know that the USSR's weapons capability isn't quite what they claim it to be. But even so, it damages relationships between them. And Khrushchev says he's not going to negotiate with Eisenhower ever, until he's out of office, right? He won't negotiate with Eisenhower again. So in 1960, Eisenhower leaves office and John F. Kennedy is elected. John F. Kennedy, of course, is a young president. People are very excited about him. You'll probably know that he's going to get assassinated because it's very famous. But during that time, again, Khrushchev is still dealing with the Berlin problem, right? And again, the problem is that the west side of Berlin looks fantastic because it's capitalist and it's getting lots of money from the west. The eastern side of Berlin looks gray and brown and drab and depressed, right? It's awful. So Khrushchev is trying to get the Allies out of Berlin, and he's trying to sort of stop the flow, because people, of course, they're fleeing, right? They're defecting to the other side because they don't want to live in gray, brown, depressed East Berlin. They want to live in fun, colorful, rich West Berlin. And so people are fleeing the eastern side of Germany through Berlin. And finally, Khrushchev closes the border permanently. And so there has been a division between East-West Germany since the end of the war. And there's been sort of a checkpoint thing where you can go from east to west in Berlin. But in 1961, Khrushchev is going to see that so many people are fleeing the Soviet sphere. He says, you know what, I'm just going to close it entirely. And so he closes the border, and then they start the construction of Berlin Wall. And to begin with, there's not really much of a wall, right? It's just barbed wire with guards. But as you'll see here, I'll show you, good morning. As I'll show you here, the Soviets are dead serious about making sure that people do not flee the eastern side. And so, again, some of the things you'll see here take a little while to be built. And so what you'll see is kind of the 1980s version of the wall. And so, but it's worth looking at because Again, they're serious about keeping people in.
This border cuts Germany in two, separates East and West, communism and democracy, repression and freedom. Its sole purpose, to keep the people of communist East Germany from fleeing to freedom in the Federal Republic of Germany, the West. Berlin has special status. In the middle of East Germany, the city is divided into 4 sectors at the end of World War II. In 1961, the western sectors are surrounded by a fortified border 155 kilometers long, the Wall. East Berlin in the early 80s. This street leads to West Berlin. Anyone entering this restricted security zone requires special permits, even visitors of the cemetery seen here on the left. It's been closed off since the wall was built. This is where the barriers marking the border begin. Going further means risking life and limb. Behind what is known as the inner wall is a place an average East German citizen may never enter. A heavily guarded strip of borderland. This is what it looks like at the start of the 1980s. The fortifications are continually reinforced and expanded. The area along the restricted zone is patrolled not only by soldiers, but also by the East German police and other watchful agents. Preventing people from fleeing communist East Germany is an elaborate and expensive operation. Two soldiers guard a 200-meter stretch of border here. In total, there are 12,000 border troops posted in Berlin. The next obstacle is a signal fence. Touch it, and a silent alarm goes off. Soldiers in the watchtowers can immediately see where the alarm has been triggered. The would-be escapee doesn't know it, but the guards are already aware of what is happening and where. The guards in the tower can alert other troops along the border and direct their operations. At night, the no man's land around the border is lit up bright as day. In the West, this area is known as the Death Strip, a place where East German border guards will shoot to kill as a last resort to prevent an escape. The Berlin Wall claims 136 lives. The Church of Reconciliation is surrounded by the Death Strip. The wall separates the church from its parish, most of which lies in the west. In 1985, the East German regime demolishes the church. One possible reason is that it obstructs the guards' view of the border. Tank traps prevent escapees from breaking through, but also the guards. On the other side, a carpet of steel spikes, 14 centimeters long, seriously wounds anyone who steps on it. East German border guards call it asparagus board. Westerners nickname it Stalinrasen, or Stalin's lawn. The ground is smoothed regularly so that anyone trying to flee across it will leave a mark. And finally, the notorious Berlin Wall, 3 meters 60 tall, the last insurmountable barrier. The side of the wall facing West Berlin is still part of East Germany. Openings used by the guards to inspect the other side need 2 separate keys to unlock. One person alone cannot open them. At strategic intersections, the East German regime leaves weak points in the reinforced concrete barrier, so its tanks can break through to the west in the event of a war. Nearly everyone in the world is familiar with this view of the wall, looking from the west. Initially, observation platforms are built for West Berlin's police, later for tourists. This view at Bernauer Strasse shows that the sophisticated containment system in Berlin is far more than a wall.
This is the checkers game where grandson and granddad will bond.
Berlin is a special case. West Berlin, effectively part of the Federal Republic of Germany, is located in the middle of East Germany. The border separating East and West Germany is 1,378 kilometers long. Hertensleben is an East German village. The people here live in immediate proximity to the border fortifications. But most East Germans never get as far as Hertensleben. Sentries stop anyone without a permit about 5 kilometers away from the border. Right on the frontier in Hertensleben itself, the residents are confronted constantly with the threat of forced resettlement to places deeper inside East Germany. In the 1950s and 60s, those deemed to have a high potential to flee had already been resettled as part of what the East German regime called Operation Vermin. Before Germany was divided, this street simply ran a straight course. Now a concrete barrier cuts across it, blocking any view to the west, the first major obstacle of the fortified border. The no man's land here is just 40 meters wide, one of the narrowest points along the frontier between East and West Germany. Just 5 meters behind the wall is a deeply anchored alarm fence. Openings have been left in its foundation for the many rabbits living in no man's land to prevent them from triggering the alarm. Six soldiers stand guard in the watchtowers around the clock. Two are at the top. The other 4 are posted in quarters below. In some places, guard dogs are added to the patrol of the area. A tripwire serves as a further alarm. When a person runs into it, a yellow flare is triggered. The death strip is lit up brightly at night. Live ammunition is fired at anyone trying to flee. Until 1983, landmines along the inner German border are another lethal danger. Past those, another tripwire. When triggered, it fires a red flare to let the border guards know precisely how far an escape attempt has progressed. Along the patrol route for military vehicles is another area of smooth, bare soil. Every footprint can be seen clearly. Tank traps block all vehicles here as well. Concrete barriers are put up only in areas believed to be especially vulnerable. Most places along the inner German border are marked by a fence, 3 meters tall. There are gates where the fence meets the wall. The first few meters on the other side of the barriers are part of East Germany. Only the most reliable soldiers patrol there. Just 100 meters away, automatic firing devices shoot at anyone who hits the tripwire. Some 60,000 of these weapons are in use until 1983. Hundreds of people are killed trying to flee East Germany. The communist regime has made prisoners of its people. They are walled in.
Yeah, so you can see again when Khrushchev puts up the wall, it's it's a fence basically, but you can see that it gets much more serious as time goes on, right? And you can see how important it is to keep their people in. So let's look at this. Where is number 20? Okay. Okay, so were you able to answer that one, number 26, what the significance was of the shooting down of that U-2 spy plane? Why was that important?
Proves that the spy that it really proved the Soviet Union that the US is spying.
Right, so it kind of proved Khrushchev's theory that the U.S. was spying on them, right? And he was right about that. What else does the U-2 spy plane discover? Not over the Soviet Union, but over Cuba.
Soviets and the Soviet Union.
Or almost, right? So yeah, a U-2 spy plane flies over Cuba. Cuba has recently had a communist revolution, right? They've overthrown, oh gosh, who did he overthrow? Did it say in the textbook? What's that? Yeah, what was his name? But is it Batista? Is it Fulgencio Batista or something like that? Yeah, so he's overthrown and communist Fidel Castro comes to power, right? And of course, how does the Soviet Union feel about that? Yeah, communist revolution? Woo! That's one more, right? That's one more on our team. And so Khrushchev and the Soviet Union are only too happy to recognize communist Cuba and enter into trade agreements with them and provide them with all kinds of things. But then Khrushchev gets the idea to install weapons on the island, right? Why would he want to install nuclear weapons on Cuba, of all places?
America already focused on missiles in the countries which are among the Soviet Union. Like they are worried, Soviet Union was worrying about that because their instructions and their cities were under the American missiles, and like they need to put the bombs in the Cuba to threaten America.
Yeah. Yeah. Cuba's basically in America's backyard, right? And all of those American cities would be easily reachable with nuclear weapons from Cuba, right? And then Khrushchev's gonna have the hammer, right? He's gonna have it over the US's head and say, do what I want, or I can very easily launch a missile at you, right? So scary, right? For the US anyway. So the spy plane flies over Cuba. The Americans know that Khrushchev is building missile sites in Cuba. The missiles aren't there yet, but they know what he's up to. And so the question, of course, becomes what to do about it, right? What should we do? And there's kind of it's always three, right? But there's three positions in terms of what should be done. What are three options that the Americans have? They're all associated with birds for some reason. Three options. Okay, so what do the Hawks want? Right. So yeah, so that's the military option, right? So either go in and with jets and bomb the missile sites, or yeah, some sort of military action to end this, right? What's the other one you mentioned? Doves. What are the doves suggesting? Okay, what does diplomacy mean? What does diplomacy mean? Or when you're being diplomatic, what are you? Somebody Google it for me. What's diplomacy? If it's an option, we need to know what the heck it means.
The profession, activity, or skill of managing international relations, typically by countries representatives abroad.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of it's international relations, but it's talking it out, right? So the doves are saying, hey Hawks, you guys cool your jets. We're not going to go in and bomb everything. Let's talk it out, right? Let's make a phone call. Let's connect with these guys and see if we can resolve this with words, right? Not with weapons. And then there's people, I guess, in the middle who are the owls. I wonder if these kind of bird names came later or at the time, because it's easy to call some. Because what kind of characteristics do we associate with owls? What are owls like? What? Sorry, they're what? Oh, they're very watchful. Yeah, because they often have these big eyes, right? But what else? Yeah, and again, maybe there's some different cultural things too, but you know, owls are often thought of as wise creatures, right? And so I wonder if they thought they were wise at the time, or if it's only wise when you look back at it. But either way, what do these owls want? Or what do these owls suggest? What are these owls suggesting? Yeah, so like kind of like a little bit of muscle, but not an outright military action, right? And so, of course, the owls are the ones that kind of win out, right? John Kennedy goes with the owl approach. So what do they do? What's the plan? So Khrushchev is going to try and deliver his nuclear missiles to Cuba to be installed there. What's the American plan? Was it related to Turkey? How so? Oh yeah, okay. So there is a Turkey connection to this, right? Because Khrushchev is basically trying to put missiles in the United States backyard, right? But the Americans have already done that to the Soviet Union. They've installed their missiles in Turkey, and they're pointing at the Soviet Union, right? So this would kind of balance it out a little bit, right? So I guess Turkey is involved in that way, right? But so there's missiles in Turkey that might be up for negotiation. But what are the Americans doing? Because Khrushchev is sending his ships out to deliver these nuclear missiles to Cuba. So what do the Americans do? Yeah. Yeah, they quarantine it, right? They think blockade is too strong of a word, even though it's the same thing, but they quarantine it, right? So they put all their Navy ships around Cuba, and nothing gets through, or at least no Soviet ships get through, right? All right, so this is kind of a tense situation, right? And I think that the textbook doesn't do a very good job of relating like how stressful this must have been, okay? Because think about it. Americans are all sitting there with their Navy ships outside of Cuba saying to Soviet ships, you're not going to pass, right? We're going to stop you. Soviet ships are sailing toward Cuba full of nuclear weapons, right? There's nuclear submarines floating around supporting the Soviet ships. America has nuclear submarines and nuclear bombers in the air all the time, like ready to go. And in fact, this is a place where Canada kind of annoyed. Okay, they pissed off the Americans. We pissed off the Americans because the Americans asked us to, can they land their nuclear planes in Canada and refuel? And the Canadian government said, no, we don't want your nuclear weapons in our country. So the Americans got kind of annoyed. But anyway, so everybody is on full alert because, like, what's going to happen when these two ships come together? What if the Russian ships don't stop? What if they keep going? Are they going to collide? Is the US going to open fire on the Soviet Union? Is the Soviet Union going to open fire on the Americans? If they do, is that a declaration of war? Is somebody going to launch a nuclear weapon? What if one of the nuclear weapons on board a ship is detonated? Does that mean that the US is going to use their nuclear weapons? Like, nobody knows, right? These two ships are kind of inching toward each other, and nobody knows what's going to happen. But everyone has their finger on the button ready to do something about it, right? And so it's pretty tense. Yeah, and again, I don't think the book does a very good job of communicating just how, and this was a 5-day period, right? So everyone's like biting their nails, wondering what's going to happen when the Soviet ships come upon the American ships. And again, what do, right? Imagine you're in charge of a US battleship and you see this Soviet ship coming for Cuba and they don't stop. They're just going to go right by you. Do you shoot at them? If you do, are they going to shoot back? If they do, does that mean you're now at war? What to do, right? It's tense, and there's a lot of nuclear weapons involved, right? And so this thing could very easily cascade and get out of control, right? And so I would say this is a super tense period, and it's probably the closest that the two countries have ever come to a full conflict. And really, like, anything could have happened, right? But what does happen in the end? How does this get resolved? We're all still here, so it didn't launch a full nuclear Armageddon. But how did this thing get resolved? Yeah. 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 They talk it out, right? So it's Robert Kennedy, John's brother, and I think Attorney General of the United States, It's his brother and Anatoly Dobrinin, who's the ambassador of USSR to America, right? And those guys sit down and talk it out, right, and negotiate a deal. And so, yeah, like super tense, right? As this is happening, and these guys are just like, hey, so how can we end this? You know, what do you want, and what do you want, and how can we come to an agreement, right? And they do, right? They manage to talk it out, and both sides manage to step back from the edge, right? But again, like nobody knows what's going to happen, right? And without any sort of deal, neither side wants to back down, right? Because backing down, what does it mean, right? Like, what if, imagine you're the Americans, right? And the Soviet Union is coming toward you in your ships, and they don't stop, and you decide, you know what? We don't want a nuclear war. We're just going to let them go to Cuba. Now what? Now you've got nuclear weapons in Cuba. What's the American public going to think? Quarantine was useless, right?
If they give it or not, the nuclear weapons.
Yeah. But then, you know, do you feel that your government will protect you from the Russians? No, right? Then everyone gets scared, right? And then, of course, the Russians will be more bold, right? Because they just got to do whatever they wanted, and the US didn't stop them. So what will they do next, right? Maybe they'll roll into Berlin and, you know, with their tanks and push the Americans out of Berlin too, right? And so if you kind of let them get one victory, they'll probably keep going, right? But at the same time, you don't want to start a full nuclear war, right? So you can't back down, but you can't use too much force either, right? Because backing down is bad, but using too much force can cause a massive conflict that could end millions of lives, right? So scary, right? I think it's scary anyway. Okie dokie. Let's take a little break. We'll come back. I'll show you some footage, okay? And yeah. Okay, take a break. Okay. So we have seen, oh yeah. So we've seen that, of course, the Berlin Wall has been constructed. Crazy, are you with me?
Yes.
Daniel? Michelle? Ben, are you awake? Nope. Yo-ya? Okay. So we've seen here that the Berlin Wall has been constructed in order to keep East Germans from escaping to beautiful West Germany. And then shortly thereafter, we have a bit of a confrontation between the US and the Soviet Union in the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Super tense, anything can happen, and everybody's nuclear weapons are armed and ready to go, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen. Yeah, it's a big question mark, right? And so 5 days, the world is kind of hanging on the edge, wondering what will come of this, okay? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you a little bit more of that video. And so if you're online, the video itself is in Microsoft Teams. It says Class 36, The Cold War. And we watched 30 minutes of it yesterday, so we're going to start from 30 minutes in today, okay? So I'll direct you to that video, start at 30 minutes, and then carry on till the end. We'll do the same thing here in class, and then we'll discuss what we've seen once it's over, okay? So online people, will see you just shortly, okay?
You have broader considerations that might follow what you would call the falling domino principle. You have a row of dominoes set up and you knock over the first one, and what will happen to the last one is certainly that it'll go over very quickly. So you could have a beginning of a disintegration that would have the most profound influence.
The tragedy that followed was epic in its scope and senselessness. Billions of dollars and more than 50,000 American lives were spent to stop the dominoes from falling. In the process, the United States laid waste to much of the country and killed more than 3 million people. But the justification for war in Vietnam was fatally flawed. Ho was a communist, but he was not a puppet of Moscow, as the U.S. feared. His resistance was based on a fierce patriotism that inspired his people to fight on, even in the face of almost inconceivable losses. With the benefit of military support from the Soviet Union and Communist China, they frustrated the U.S. for 2 decades. Finally, in 1975, a tired and demoralized United States abandoned the war. The last Americans were evacuated from South Vietnam, and communist forces overran the capital city of Saigon.
But these events, tragic as they are, portend neither the end of the world nor of America's leadership in the world.
In the end, the dominoes didn't fall. But the communist victory did influence the Cold War. In the 1970s, the United States endured a crisis of self-confidence that came to be known as the Vietnam Syndrome. Americans lost faith in their government. Political leaders lost faith in their military. The country questioned its role in foreign affairs. No one had any taste for another Vietnam. This view contributed to an easing of international relations during the decade known as détente. In the Soviet Union, the effects of the Vietnam War were even more far-reaching. Emboldened by the communist victory and
you have
victory and America's ambivalence toward foreign affairs, Kremlin leaders spent lavishly to build their arsenals and extend their communist empire around the world. It was, in effect, a brazen attempt to overtake the United States and win the Cold War. It would be, however, their greatest mistake.
Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
As John F. Kennedy assumed the presidency in 1961, he inherited an all-or-nothing defense policy. It provided only two military options for dealing with a Soviet threat: do nothing and let the diplomats work it out, or launch an all-out nuclear attack against the communist bloc. Humiliation or Holocaust? President Kennedy demanded more options, a middle ground. A new defense policy emerged known as flexible response. It called for a massive buildup in conventional forces, as well as new tactical and strategic nuclear arms. It also emphasized counterinsurgency and other unconventional military operations for dealing with threats in the Third World. With this diverse arsenal, the president and his advisors believed it would be possible to fight a limited war with the Soviets, even a limited nuclear war, without igniting a world-ending apocalypse. This premise was tested by the major Cold War crises of the early 1960s. Kennedy encountered his first international challenge after just 3 months in office. Just 90 miles from the beaches of Florida, a military dictator had seized power in Cuba. Fidel Castro promised his people,
not communism or Marxism, but representative democracy, social justice, and a well-planned economy.
But you U.S. leaders feared the worst. Castro looked like a communist and talked like a communist. He was a liability. In April 1961, plans were set in motion for an armed invasion of Cuba. The covert mission took its name from the main landing ground on the Bay of Pigs. The CIA had armed and trained a band of Cuban exiles for the covert operation. President Kennedy approved the plan, but then he crippled the operation by refusing air and naval support. The invasion force was crushed. The Kennedy administration humiliated. Attorney General Robert Kennedy feared that the Soviet Union would seize on the Bay of Pigs as a sign of weakness. He warned his brother, "If we don't want Russia to set up missile bases in Cuba, we had better decide now what we are willing to do to stop it." Following the Bay of Pigs, the U.S. imposed economic sanctions on Cuba. Castro appealed to the Soviet Union for aid. For Khrushchev, it was a coup, a communist outpost in America's own backyard. What could be better? Khrushchev's elation sprouted into a germ of an idea. What if we threw a hedgehog down Uncle Sam's pants? While Khrushchev's scheme took root in the Caribbean, the two Cold War superpowers faced off over the increasingly contentious issue of Berlin. By the 1960s, West Berlin was a thriving cosmopolitan city. In the words of one Cold War historian, the West German capital was a permanent advertisement for the virtues of capitalism and democracy in the middle of communist East Germany. Still, West Berliners lived with the fear that the communists could cut off land access to their city, as they had done during the Berlin blockade in 1948. Jobs, prosperity, and freedom, and the security afforded by the American military presence beckoned to the hungry, disenfranchised, and repressed of East Germany. To the exasperation of their communist leaders, millions fled across the open border. By the time President Kennedy met Nikita Khrushchev in 1961, millions of East Germany's best and brightest had left the country, and the mass exodus had become a crisis for the communists.
Marxism was born in Germany. If it does not prove itself as superior and vital here, then we have not won.
Tired of haggling over the divided city, Khrushchev issued an ultimatum to the American president: withdraw U.S. troops currently occupying West Berlin, or face a blockade. Kennedy stood his ground.
We will at all times be ready to talk, if talk will help. But we must also be ready to resist with force, if force is used upon us. The source of world trouble and tension is Moscow, not Berlin. And if war begins, it will have begun in Moscow and not Berlin.
War did not come to Berlin, but a wall did. Barbed wire and concrete 12 feet high and 100 miles long, isolating West Berlin. East German border patrols had orders to shoot to kill, and they did. The wall was a hateful thing, Khrushchev admitted, but what should I have done? The East German economy would have collapsed. The much-hated Berlin Wall finally settled the nagging German question and averted war in Europe. But events elsewhere threatened to push the world to the brink of destruction. In the summer of 1962, Khrushchev's hedgehog triggered the gravest confrontation of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Soviet ships crossed the Atlantic bound for Cuba. They carried military hardware, Soviet troops, and nuclear missiles, capable of striking nearly anywhere in the United States. On October 14th, U-2 reconnaissance flights over Cuba confirmed what for months had been rumored.
Unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. A strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile, launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
Found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons be turned back.
For Americans, the idea of going to war with the Soviet Union was terrifying, but having nuclear missiles stationed permanently in Cuba was unthinkable.
I'd hate like heck to see us go to war, but if it's necessary to prevent a nuclear war, I think the action has to be taken at this time.
Well, I think it's high time we stopped Russia from having things her own way.
I know that some action should be taken, but he's going to have to tread very lightly, short of war.
At the United Nations, U.S. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson confronted his Soviet counterpart.
All right, sir. Let me ask you one simple question. Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sights in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation. Yes or no?
I am not in an American courtroom, sir, and therefore I do not wish to answer a question that is put to me in the fashion in which a prosecutor does. In due course, sir, you will have your reply.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision.
The crisis turned critical. U.S. military forces prepared for a possible invasion of Cuba. It was the greatest emergency troop mobilization since World War II. For the first time in its history, the nation's nuclear army, the Strategic Air Command, or SAC, moved to Defense Condition 2. The next step, DEFCON 1, would mean nuclear war. If a nuclear strike was launched from Cuba, American Minuteman missiles were poised to destroy every major city in the Soviet Union.
Re-entry, arming and fusing.
Just as the flexible response had promised, the president had every military option at his disposal.
Warhead, arming and fusing. Channel 7.
As tension mounted, the first opening in the crisis came from Khrushchev. On October 26th, he cabled the president.
Mr. Kennedy, you and I are like two men pulling on a rope with a knot in the middle. The harder we pull, the tighter the knot, until even he who tied it will not have the strength to untie it. Let us relax forces, take measures to untie that knot. We are ready for this.
As the two leaders fumbled to untie the knot, events they had unleashed threatened to overwhelm them. Castro pleaded with Khrushchev to launch a preemptive nuclear strike should the U.S. mount an invasion. In Washington, Kennedy was pressed to attack Cuba. Air Force General Curtis LeMay insisted American military forces should surround the island and, if need be, fry it. While the world edged closer to the nuclear abyss, Bobby Kennedy met secretly with the Soviet ambassador in Washington to seek a negotiated settlement. In the end, diplomacy prevailed. On October 28th, a message was broadcast from Moscow. Khrushchev had agreed to remove the missiles. The world breathed a sigh of relief.
The following is the text of President Kennedy's statement of noon. I welcome Chairman Khrushchev's statesmanlike decision to stop building bases in Cuba, dismantling offensive weapons, returning them to the Soviet Union under UN verification. This is an important and constructive contribution to peace.
In exchange for the removal of Cuban missiles, President Kennedy pledged that the U.S. would not invade Cuba. Privately, he also agreed to remove American missiles stationed in Turkey and targeting the Soviet Union. The missile crisis caused the president to reconsider his assumption that a nuclear war was winnable. He now understood that destroying the Soviet Union would mean sacrificing the United States to the same fate. This premise became the basis of a new Kennedy defense strategy: mutual assured destruction, MAD. The idea was that if no one stood a chance of surviving a nuclear war, no one would start one. Kennedy and Khrushchev tried to rein in the spiraling arms race following the Cuban Missile Crisis. Neither side was prepared to eliminate nuclear weapons, but during the 1960s, accords were reached on how to manage them. The first agreement was signed in 1963, the Limited Test Ban Treaty, which prohibited atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. It was a small step, but laid the groundwork for a more productive relationship between the two leaders. It was not to be. 1 month after the Test Ban Treaty was signed in Moscow, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. The official government investigation concluded that a lone gunman was responsible. Lee Harvey Oswald, an American communist with ties to the Soviet Union and Cuba. Was Oswald part of a conspiracy to assassinate the president? If he was, he took the secret to his grave. 2 days after the assassination, Oswald himself was gunned down. Just 4 months later, Khrushchev was deposed as head of the Soviet Union. The charges? He had allowed his own cult of personality to develop and no longer listened to advisors. He had ruined Soviet agriculture, brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, and allowed the Berlin Wall to be constructed, a monument to the failures of communism. In short, Khrushchev's accusers said, he had humiliated the Soviet Union. Still, no blood was shed in this Russian Revolution. Khrushchev saw that as true progress.
Could anyone have dreamed of telling Stalin that he didn't suit us anymore and suggesting he retire? Not even a wet spot would have remained where we had been standing. Now, everything is different. The fear is gone. That's my contribution.
Okay, so we'll end it there. Yeah, we'll end it there. Yeah, pack it up. We'll pick it up tomorrow.